Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's good to be here this afternoon, and I think we can hear from the discussion on this side of the House that just how tragic and pathetic this piece of legislation really is. And it's interesting because I think the Liberals think they found a balance because the NDP oppose it for some reasons, we oppose it for others. But typically, the reason it's being opposed is because it just gives way too much power to the ministers, way too little transparency and accountability. And I want to talk about that a little bit. Mr. Speaker, not only is this piece of legislation dangerous, and I use that word deliberately, but it's going to be the impact of it's going to be very real for large numbers of people across this country, particularly those who live in areas where they're dependent on resource development. The Liberals had the opportunity to actually smooth out the environmental assessment process in bringing this bill in, and instead they've actually chosen to do completely the opposite. And I think there's an intent here actually to destroy the credibility that the EA process has had in Canada because they don't actually want to see resource development carried out here. Our Prime Minister will say one thing in Alberta, and we saw earlier this spring him go to France 2 days later and say, look, I apologize to you because we haven't gotten rid of the energy industry soon enough. And so I believe that there's an agenda here that to complicate this process, to make it so it's basically unmanageable, and then the reality will be that resource projects across this country are not going to be possible to put in place. And investors are already basically laughing at Canada and walking away. We saw an article yesterday saying that investors no longer even bother considering Canada as an option to invest in. So the Liberals are getting their way, the NDP are getting their way. The problem with these big government initiatives and socialism, Mr. Speaker, and for those of us who lived in Saskatchewan, we understand this, is that the pain starts, it takes a while for the pain to actually begin. It doesn't happen right away, it's not immediate, but it is profound and it's long-lasting. And this bill is going to have a profoundly long-lasting and negative impact on Canada, on our economy. Now, the bill that we're dealing with today is C-69. It's called Enact the Impact Assessment Act and the Canadian Energy Regulatory Act to amend the Navigation Protection Act and make consequential amendments to other acts. And actually, the main thing that it does, Mr. Speaker, is sets up a new Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, replacing some other agencies, and that agency then will be the lead on all federal reviews of major projects, and expected, I guess, to work with other bodies on this. But I think realistically what's going to happen here is because of the many things that are being thrown into this mix of what will be called an environmental assessment, the reality is that these projects just are not going to get done. And it's just interesting because it has added a whole number of things that need to be considered in terms of an environmental assessment, and that things go far beyond the environment, but basically gives anyone who has an objection to a project the right to claim that there's some impact on them, and so then they have a legitimate reason to have these projects stopped. I want to talk a little bit about the process that's going to take place, because I think when Canadians see that, they start to understand how disingenuous this government has been on this bill. If you want to apply for an environmental assessment or apply for a project, actually, you need to go through an environmental assessment on most things. And they've set this up so that in this new legislation, supposedly there will be a planning phase of up to a maximum of 180 days, and then it will go in a couple of directions. There's a few places it can go. It can go to a joint panel. It can go back to the assessment agency, and there will be some timelines. There's a variety of tracks available for that to go down. It could end up at a review panel. And the agency itself will oversee the smaller projects, and then they'll have a full review on the larger projects. And then after a while, when that's done, the agency or panel has submitted the recommendation, then the minister has 30 days to approve or disapprove. Well, that sounds pretty straightforward until you start to look at the actual processes that are involved in this. And I just want to go through three possible tracks, and probably use most of my time up doing this, but just to point out to Canadians how bizarre this gets and how much interference the minister can play. And the NDP were just pointing that out in the last speech, the last questions, that the minister basically has authority at all levels over these things. They can make things go ahead or stop dead, and they can stay stopped if the minister and the cabinet decide to do that. So I just want to talk first of all about a decision that doesn't require a joint panel. It doesn't even require approval by cabinet. And under this new legislation, there's a 180-day planning phase. So this is something that's brand new that the government's thrown in there that already puts a 6-month if you want to call it delay or 6-month kind of stop on the project moving ahead. And this can be extended by 90 days, or actually, Mr. Speaker, it can be extended indefinitely by the minister if someone demands that. And there's no clarity around what that means. Then there's a 300-day time limit for the impact assessment itself. So almost a year. And Mr. Speaker, no surprise, this can be extended by 90 days or indefinitely by the cabinet. So again, timelines are thrown completely out. There's no certainty at all. You ask, why would investors bother getting involved with something like this? And this is the simplest process of the few that are there. And then there's a 30-day time limit. So after all of this, with the minister and the cabinet have already been involved at 2 different levels, then it comes to the minister and the cabinet to make the decision. What kind of industry organization is going to, or business is going to come forward and put themselves through this when there's absolutely no certainty? And, Mr. Speaker, no surprise, but that 30-day time limit then can be extended by 90 days or can be extended indefinitely. So on that one, that's the simplest. You don't require a joint panel. You don't require approval by cabinet. And at all 3 levels of the planning and working through the process, the cabinet has authority to extend the deadline indefinitely or to whatever they choose to. You don't require a joint panel. You require approval by cabinet. Well, under the C-69, the total time should be about 570 days. So we're looking at almost a year and a half. But again, Mr. Speaker, there are several opportunities to extend it. So it starts out again with that 180-day planning phase, and that can be extended by 90 days or indefinitely by the Minister of Cabinet. Then there's a 300-day time limit for the impact assessment itself. So the proponent has to get down and get this all done in 300 days, considering all of the different factors that the government's thrown into C-69. And this, Mr. Speaker, can be extended by 90 days or indefinitely by the Minister or Cabinet. And then there's a 90-day limit for the Cabinet to make a decision. And again, Mr. Speaker, this can be extended by 90 days or indefinitely by the Cabinet. Those are 2 tracks. The third one is a decision that requires a joint panel with a cabinet decision. And on this one, Mr. Speaker, now the time frame is set at 835 days, so we're looking at well over 2 years, and with an opportunity, at least one opportunity to extend. There's 10 days to start a 45-day screening process. This is once the decision's been made that this has to go through a joint panel. Then there's 60 days from notice of commencement to refer the assessment to the panel, and then there's 24 months from the referral when they must issue a decision statement. And, Mr. Speaker, this can be extended 90 days by the minister or indefinitely by cabinet. Under C-69, that actually, Mr. Speaker, was in the past under the 2012 method, but under C-69 it goes from that 800 days to 915 days, and there are 6 opportunities in there then to extend. So the 180-day planning phase, the 45-day window for the minister to refer assessment to a panel. There's no timeline for establishing a panel at all. The panel has to submit a report to the minister within 600 days, so another 2 years down the road, and this can be extended by the minister until anything that they prescribe is completed, or by 90 days. Cabinet can extend it indefinitely again, and then there's another 90-day timeline for the cabinet. So, Mr. Speaker, you start to see this assessment process that this government has thrown in here is basically a game. It's a game that the cabinet can play with anybody who wants to apply for a project in Canada. It's no surprise, as I mentioned before, that people are looking other places. They're investing in other countries. The Americans right now are making very clear that they want to become the world's largest energy producer and the world's largest energy exporter, and they're eating our lunch right now. They're doing the things. They're lowering the taxes. They're easing the regulatory burden for people. They're not imposing a massive carbon tax that's going to raise the price of everything. And it's no surprise that the money is moving out of Canada and into the United States. And I guess the latest version of that is this government deciding that they're going to pay $5 billion to a Texas-based company to buy a used pipeline, and then they're going to spend another somewhere around $8 to $10 billion at least, probably more than that, knowing that government's involved in this, to give to this project that where the proponent initially didn't even ask for any money. So, Mr. Speaker, I see I'm coming to the end here very quickly, but it's unfortunate the Liberals have not kept their promise. This is one more that's been broken. They haven't fulfilled their commitments. You know, really this entire piece of legislation is just meant to hamper the industry's capacity to be able to do resource development in this country, and I'm sorry that it's even come forward. I wish it was set aside, and it will not be a good thing in this country if this legislation is passed.
In comments, the honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So once again, we're confronted with one of those issues where the Conservatives think we're not doing enough, and the NDP think we're doing. The Conservatives think we're doing too much, and the NDP think that we're not doing enough. And I can't help but wonder, like just objectively speaking, if you removed yourself from all the partisanship, would you not think that perhaps what the government is proposing is somewhere right around where it should be, what Canadians expect and what Canadians want? But you know what, I take particular interest with the member's comment with respect to investment in Canada. Yes, despite the fact that the price of oil has gone down and investment throughout the world is suffering as a result of that, Canada still had a growth rate of 3.1% in 2017 and is on track for approximately 2.5% according to the BDC in 2018. So can the member not at least admit some of the basic facts, which are that maybe things aren't as horrible and as near catastrophic as the Conservatives are suggesting they are?
For Cypress Hills grasslands.
Well, it's actually hilarious, this government, when they think everyone's against them, they assume that they found a good balance, and as usual, that's not the case. This isn't a balance, this is just a mess. And if you heard the criticisms earlier, we have some varying criticisms from the NDP, but we have some common ones too, which is that this bill does not achieve the goals that it sets out. It involves the cabinet and the minister at far too many places and far too many occasions, and I guess we've got concerns for different reasons on that. But the reality is these guys have cost Canada hundreds of billions of dollars of investment. We talk about I think it's 70 or 80 billion dollars on the oil and gas side. We know that they lost a $35 billion Petronas natural gas plant because they couldn't make a decision about pipelining. Mining industry in this country has basically gone into neutral in terms of applying for projects. I don't know if there's maybe one on the approval process right now. So this is not a good thing for Canada. It's not a good thing for resource development. And as I mentioned earlier, the socialist policies that the member from Kingston across the way really loves to espouse are the kinds of things that actually destroy economies eventually and leave people far behind where they should be, where they should have been in the first place.
In comments, the honourable member for Couch and Malahat Langford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to ask my colleague from the Conservatives, specifically in the context of the vote that we had last week on Bill C-262. Now, I know the Conservatives didn't vote for it, but the important fact is that the Liberals did. And my colleague, the member for Edmonton Strathcona, has moved a series of amendments at report stage that seek to bring Bill C-69 in harmony along the lines of what the Liberals supported last week on Bill C-262. So my question to my colleague is, could he reasonably expect that the Liberals would at least remain consistent and support those amendments by the member for Edmonton Strathcona, or are we going to see a flip-flop where the Liberals say one thing and do something completely opposite?
For Cypress Hills grasslands.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's rare that we see any consistency from the government opposite, except in the situation where they are increasing taxes on Canadians, increasing the regulatory burden on industry, and basically dragging the economy down. So I guess one of the places that would show up is this carbon tax that's been put in place, and the honesty and the transparency of this government is really kind of on display when they won't tell us how much that's going to cost. We know they've got the numbers, they've got them in documents, but they've taken the little black felt marker and they've crossed them all out. So, in answer to the member's question further down the way here, we certainly don't expect any consistency from the Liberals. We won't see it in their votes on legislation. We don't see it in their budgets. We don't see it in them keeping the promises that they've made in the past.